Hey, it's TDA, and today we're going to do a bit of a bonus episode to the Masterclass, because honestly, in the previous episodes, you've already seen everything you need in order to complete the game, scale up to whatever your end game is in terms of white science production, building multiple Dyson spheres and things like that. But in this episode, I'm going to show you how to set up your true end game blueprints. And as you can see, it's going to be quite a big blueprint. However, it's going to be set up in such a way that you can easily kind of make it your own and design your own planet-wide blueprint. So that's going to be the point. Now, specifically what we're going to do in this particular planet is we're going to be producing a massive amount of science. So let's get to it. Now let me start with a general tip, and that is actually that I would prefer to build my builds in the actual sandbox mode, because the sandbox mode allows you to easily just flatten the planet, just build as you go. You are not going to be interrupted by attacks and things like that. It's just a very peaceful, easy way to make larger builds. Now the counter argument to this, and this is a very good reason to build in your actual game, is that it's going to take you quite a bit of time to make larger builds, and during that time, if you're playing in your actual game, time is going to progress, your Dyson spheres are going to be built, your science is going to progress. So in terms of being efficient with your time, it makes sense to actually build inside your own game. So whatever direction you decide to go, just keep in mind that the sandbox is there if you want to use it. Another reason why I really like designing things in the sandbox is that it allows you just to create free stuff, so you don't run into the issue that you're trying to build a couple of smelters but you don't have those on and you need to collect them and stuff like that. You can just build uninterrupted. Now, just to show you how this actually works, because I think not everyone might know this, you can turn on this free toggle item. You can empty your inventory just to make sure you start with a clean slate. And then it's really easy to actually add things to your inventory. So you can either use the obtain common items things. This kind of drops you a little bit of everything in your inventory, but I don't find this particularly useful if you're building endgame stuff, because you don't need these Mark 1 belts and sorters, and you don't need these ships and things and stuff like that. So what I actually would recommend doing is just building these items, and this happens instantly. So you can just add whatever you need to the inventory. The maximum production size is actually set really high, so you can easily add tons of different things to your inventory. And honestly, all you need is the production facilities, some belts, sorters, and maybe the power stations when you are near the end of the actual design. But other than that, this makes it super easy to just dump everything in your inventory that you might need. Another thing that I think is really important to keep in mind is that when you start building, I recommend starting from the upper portion of the middle area of your planet, if that makes sense. So if you look at your planet, the middle area is the largest build area that you have. It's most convenient to set up your initial facilities. And then once you get closer to the top of your planet, you see these jumps in the grid. Now you want to stay away from these initially. You can actually really nicely utilize this space, but if you're making larger builds, you want them to stick in the middle part of your planet, or basically around the equator. And if you start building from the top line, this makes it a lot easier to make sure that you are basically building downwards. Now, something else to keep in mind if you start out from this top line, that you will find the equator somewhere here. It's the thick line in the middle of the planet. So if you make sure that your build stays between this thick line and the upper one that I just designated over here, you can actually copy the top half of your equator design into the bottom half, and you can duplicate your design easily. So you can really easily make sure that you can basically copy paste your design a couple of times around the planet. Last but not least, if you're designing your endgame facilities, I do recommend that you actually use the endgame buildings as well. So in the previous episode, I set up a dark fog farm that will not only get you the resources you need to both research these and construct these, but it will actually also construct these endgame smelters and assemblers. Now the matrix labs upgrade you don't necessarily need. Honestly, they look really cool, but they're not particularly useful. You don't really need it because the normal matrix lab is super efficient already. But these two things will save you a massive amount of building space and allow you to cram a huge amount of production into a very small space, even without really optimizing for space specifically. It's just really cool to use, and you only need a couple of hundred of these buildings to set up a massive facility, so I highly recommend that you use these buildings. People tend to get a little bit daunted by designing a massive facility because of the huge amount of resources that go into that. So if you're designing your own planet-wide designs, then I would highly recommend that you cut them up in smaller pieces so it becomes a lot more manageable. This has a lot of advantages, but it also has some disadvantages. The main one being that you're going to set up a lot of these ILSs and PLSs, and that just makes things less space efficient. However, I never understand why people are really worried about optimizing space, because at this point in the game you have probably dozens of planets at your disposal, and I've never run into a point in the game where I actually ran out of space to build. So I'm not entirely sure why you would want to optimize that, but I do acknowledge that this is not necessarily the most space efficient way to build. It is definitely the most time efficient way to build, because you won't be wasting a lot of time trying to min-max where your belts are going and stuff like that. It's also worth keeping in mind that when you're setting up a planet-wide facility, you do want to initially start with a design that has a little bit of a smaller scale, for the simple reason that you're going to bring in a lot of raw resources, and this will easily become your bottleneck if you're trying to have like one ILS just requesting in tons of resources. That just won't work. So the design I'm going for in this particular case is we're going to make a design that is going to produce 4 science per second of all the different colors, and by colors I do mean actual colors. So I'm excluding white from this because basically that's going to be produced from the other colors anyway. In order to do that, we're going to set up a whole bunch of smelters over here, just starting out with the basics here. You need a little bit of graphite, you need some glass, we are going to need quite a bit of titanium, and we're going to need quite a bit of copper. But as you can see, even producing 20 science per second, so 4 of each color, this is all the base resources that we're going to need, and I'm not even proliferating. And the reason for that is that these smelters produce, where can you see that? It's over here. They're actually in a different building tab, by the way, in case you kind of missed where they were, but they're producing at 3 times speed. So this is super efficient. If you compare that to the plane smelters, it's 50% more efficient to that, and the 3 times speed with the assembly machines is actually twice the speed of the Mark III one. So this is just super efficient and will save you a lot of space, and well, it looks really cool as well. Now, in order to complete the rest of the basics, we have 18 smelters making magnets, 27 of them making iron, we have 38 of them making silicon, we need a lot of silicon, and we have 6 of them making crystal silicon. Now, honestly, these crystals you could leave out because you can make them from a rare recipe as well, but because you only need so tiny amounts of these, I just add them into my design. And you can get a little bit creative about how you are actually setting up your ILS and PLSs. So as you can see, because I know that all the resources I'm making over here are actually going to be used just within this planet, I don't need to export them off planet. I don't need to bother with a ILS, I can just use a planetary logistics station PLS. And this takes up a lot less space, so this makes it easier to keep everything nice and tidy. And as you can see, I'm actually bringing in 3 different resources in here. I could have added in the crystal silicon as well, but I had a space left over here anyway, because we're only having to bring in a couple of different resources. Now, when it comes to these resources, don't underestimate how much you're going to be requesting into your planet. So definitely another reason to start out with a smaller scale design initially, then scale it up as you are adding more and more resources to your systems. Now, there is another trick going on here. So I am actually requesting silicon, for example, over here, as well as iron over here. And then I'm doing the same thing over here. That actually allows twice the amount of supply to fly into the planet without me having to add additional ILSs to the system. So just a way to make sure you're actually utilizing your production capabilities by a lot, because don't underestimate how much resources are going to be flying into this particular setup, because of course we're smelting these at 3 times the normal speed. So this is a massive amount of stuff. Now, you might be worried about the supply on the belt, but don't forget that these ILSs in the end game can actually stack up your resources by themselves. So this is a really nice and efficient, so you can have up to 120 items per second on your belt. And this is actually also what I designed this entire thing with in mind, because I don't want to have to fiddle around with belts requesting more than 120 items per second. Just another reason to keep things smaller initially. And then something else to keep in mind is that I'm actually requesting these resources, but also having these set to local supply. Now the reason for this is, especially if you're going to copy paste a particular build several times on a planet, this allows the overflow of one of these ILSs to go into the other one. And that just makes it a lot easier to balance out your production across all your different facilities. It's something to keep in mind when you're designing this. Of course, make sure you're fully stocking all of your shuttles and vessels. And again, make sure that your PLSs are set to supply rather than demand, because otherwise things will not actually be exported throughout your base. Okie dokie, let's keep going. We added 6 assemblers making gears, 5 of them making circuit boards, 6 making magnetic rings, and then 12 making microcrystalline components. And that deals with everything we actually need for blue science between the circuit boards and the magnetic coils. But of course, we also have the red science done because we're producing the graphite over here. And I'm assuming that you're going to get your hydrogen either from gas giants, from your oil production, or from the fractionator setup that I've showed you in one of the previous episodes. So that's 2 types of science done, and we're actually already a pretty good way underway for the next few sciences as well. Moving on to the next tier of items, we have 12 assemblers making engines over here. And as you can see, I'm just using a PLS over here to feed those in. These PLSs are really tiny and small. They nicely fit into a closely related build. I wouldn't be able to put an ILS here, for example, because it would have an issue with this PLS being so close. But PLSs themselves, you can fit very close together. So you can just use that as an easy way to get everything organized and look nice and tidy. However, of course, you can be really efficient with how you put some belts in between, especially if you're producing things very close to where they're actually going to be used. So, for example, over here, I have 6 assemblers making turbines. We need the engines for that. So I'm just feeding in the engines over here. We also need the same magnetic rings that we already have over here. So I'm borrowing them from the belt over there. And then I'm actually using these turbines just to make the particle containers. So I'm actually feeding these straight into the assembler over here. And that just means that we're sort of optimizing things without making too much of a fuss about making everything look perfect. Now, of course, I do recommend that you actually line out all your buildings, your production buildings at least, as much as you can. I've actually also aligned a couple of these things. It's a little hard to tell, but I'm also trying to align these ILSs over here and things like that. Similarly, I've done that over here with these ILSs. As you can see, they're in a nice little line. So are these 2 PLSs. Things like that just make things look a lot tidier once you're starting to look at it at a larger scale. Now I'm going to be adding in everyone's favorite crystals, so we have 12 of them making titanium crystals here, 12 assemblers that is, and 6 of them making casimir crystals. Now, I do want to point out that just like in all the previous builds that we've made in the last couple of episodes in this masterclass, I am assuming that you're going to get your rare recipes from other places, or you can put them on this planet as well, but you are making use of the rare recipe. So I'm not actually going to be producing graphene or organic crystals anywhere in this particular planet, because I'm assuming you're going to get it from somewhere else. Similarly, over here we have the hydrogen that I just mentioned, just coming in, exported or imported, I should say, to this planet. Another little trick that you can use if you want to keep these larger builds compact, especially if you're going to be using a lot of different resources and therefore need a lot of ILSs, is to basically build under the roof of an ILS as much as you can. So for example, over here I added in 12 assemblers making processors. We're going to need a lot of those. And they're basically just built under the roof, under the same place that we're actually producing these. So the circuit boards as well as the components are being made over here. I'm just exporting them from the same ILS. And then on the other side of that, I am building the processors. And then I'm just feeding those back into this ILS because I can. Now this does mean that this ILS won't have access to warpers unless I feed them in from a different ILS. Now, honestly, you could set this up in such a way that the ILS actually doesn't need warpers. However, in that case, you should probably be using a PLS instead. However, remember we do need to actually export the magnetic coils and the circuit boards because of the blue science, and that's part of the thing we're trying to produce here. So make sure that you don't underestimate what you're going to be exporting where. On top of that, remember that you don't necessarily need warpers to actually import stuff. So for example, over here in these ILSs that I have here, even though I do have warpers set because I just like the fact that I can use these 10 vessels to help out with that, every vessel on a different planet that has access to this resource that is exporting it, as long as that planet has access to warpers, there will be no issues getting all your stuff to this planet. So keep that in mind as well if you want to kind of min-max stuff, or you might basically run out of spots to place your warpers in. Okie dokie, let's add in 10 more assemblers making particle broadband, a whopping 16 assemblers making planar filters, and now we're getting to the more high-tech level stuff, so you can get a little bit more creative. So for example, for the quantum chips and the lenses over here, we actually don't need that many of these assemblers. So what I've done over here is just place an ILS in the middle so we can actually make sure that they have access to all of those resources. Although you could probably set this up differently as well and just use belts instead, but we're going to need a lot more buildings still, so I figured I might as well use the space. However, I did make it so that I'm kind of building it all under the roof of this ILS over here. Now, in order to kind of optimize my spots in the ILS, I am feeding in the warpers, as you can see, from this ILS into this one over here. I'm using this as a supply depot, but that actually means I don't have any room to export both the lenses as well as the quantum chips. So the quantum chips are actually going in here, and they're being supplied to the science location, wherever that is going to be. And then the lenses are actually feeding in through this belt that I probably will have to move later on, so it goes a little bit more on the outside, because I do plan to use this space. And they feed into this remaining slot I happen to have left over here. Getting close to the end, but we still need titanium glass, so this is a very simple layout, similar to the one that I just did, but then just dedicated to glass. Now we actually need a weird amount. It's 7 assemblers making these, and that's just annoying me, but if you want, you can fit in the last one over here to make it completely symmetric, but technically you only need 7 of these. So you might have noticed that I actually skipped the production of plastic that we actually do need for some of the things that we are already producing. And the reason for that is I just hate these buildings, and it's always kind of weird to fit them in. So I saved them more or less to last, because we are now actually done with all the things that need smelters or assemblers. So we're going to fit in the weird looking stuff. Now it is worth noting that if I build something over here, I am actually really building on the equator at the moment. So this is why I keep going to a next line of production buildings, because I want to make sure that I stay between the equator and the top line of this particular region, I should say. Okay, anyway, we have 6 of these Mark II. These are well, technically they're quantum chemical plants. I'm just going to call them Mark II chemical plants. But they're the faster version, basically, and we need 6 of those, otherwise you would need 12. And they're just producing plastic, so this is a really straightforward recipe. Again, I'm assuming the oil comes from somewhere else, so I'm using that as something you're going to be mass producing on a particular planet. For example, on one of the planets that I've been showing in the previous episodes. Now, similar to how I actually fit in these chemical plants over here under this ILS to keep everything nice and tidy, I actually tried to fit in these particle colliders in this build as well. And I managed to do that quite nicely. So there's 8 of these particle colliders in between the other 2 builds that we just made. And they're feeding in from this logistics station over here. Now I thought I was going to be smart and stuff. And I figured, well, you know that golden rule where I always say you should build from east to west. I can skip that for this once and just kind of fit this in along this line from north to south. Well, of course, then I immediately found out why this is always a bad idea, because A, this belt is not really looking straight, so it's already bugging me just looking at it. Now you can actually make it straight, but the problem is that if you build a very long belt like this, let's see if I can replicate that over here. You might actually be able to see that some of these belts actually run towards each other in a little bit, and the buildings themselves also seem to be shifting a little bit on the grid. So if I remove these belts for a moment, you can actually see this happening. So these are actually built in a perfect line, at least according to the game. But as you can see, hopefully you can see this if I put the lines on, these are actually a little further away from this line than these. So these are actually built kind of over the line already, and these are standing a little bit away from the line. So that makes it pretty much impossible to connect the sorters to the belts, and we need 3 of these to connect. So long story short, don't do this, doesn't work, bad idea, and I should have known better. And maybe just as important, it looks a lot better if you just fit them into the gap that I still had over here as well. So I should have done that from the get-go. I, for some reason, was under the impression that it wasn't going to fit. As you can see, I'm actually building these particle colliders 2 on 2, so there's no space in between these sets of 2, but we only need one thing to go out. So I'm importing 3 items from the belts over here, and I'm just exporting the strange matter that we're producing over here. Then it's then combining with this belt over here, and I'm feeding into the ILS over there. Now, that makes for a pretty nice looking build if I say so myself. Now this little tiny compact build is actually going to be producing 4 signs per second of every single color. Now the actual production of the signs is obviously going to be done in a science hub, and this is just assuming you're not proliferating anything, because if you are proliferating in your science hub, so you would be if you're using my version of that, you're actually going to be producing 5 signs per second from this build. And it's just a little tiny build, so again, don't worry too much about using a little bit of space, because you can fit this several times on the planet. So to be exact, you should be able to fit this blueprint over and over again on this planet for at least 10 times, assuming that you stick everything close together. Now honestly, if you optimize the blueprint a little bit, you might actually be able to fit this gap as well, so that you could move it up to 12 times, but at least if you just take it easy and, well, just copy paste the blueprint like I've shown it over here, you should be able to produce 40 science per second on this single planet. 40 science per second, guys, that's a lot of science, and again, that is not counting proliferation, because that would move it up to 50 science per second, not counting the proliferated science itself, so that would actually lead up to a production of over 60 science per second equivalent. Anyway, getting ahead of ourselves, because we're going to need a ton of resources in order to do that, so you're not going to be slapping down this blueprint and then just getting all of that production going, and you're probably going to see that your FPS and play speed is going to drop immensely if you actually do have all of that up and running, but hey, we're here to break the game, right? Now, we do have a lot of space left on this planet, and this is intentional, because you can use this for whatever you want. For example, those rare resources, you could be producing them on this same planet as well. So I just added in the blueprint for the graphene, as well as the nanotubes, as well as the diamonds, and they're just going to be importing the rare resources over here and now putting them on the other side. Now, I just said you shouldn't be building from north to south, I know, but the exception to that rule, there's always an exception of course, is that if you put the building around the equator, the curving in the lines is actually symmetric, and as long as it doesn't interfere with your actual sorters, which it doesn't in this particular build, then I think it's acceptable. So always be ready to break your own rules, guys. Don't fuss about that too much. What else are we doing here? Well, we have, let me actually fly over there so you can see what I'm doing. I have added in some oil production, because why not? We actually don't need that much oil on this planet. We do need the hydrogen. We actually also need a little bit of oil, so we might as well just produce it over here as well. I added in a lot of power. This is just the hydrogen fuel rod, sorry, the deuterium fuel rod power over here. And well, there's a lot of power that you can fit around the circle to the north or south if you want. What else did I do over here? I had a fractionator set up, because we do actually need quite a bit of hydrogen on this particular planet, so producing that locally just speeds things up a little bit. And then just because I figured, well, you could also just build the actual science build on this planet as well, because, well, after all, we are producing most of our science here now. That would actually imply that you want to remove the science dome from the other planet if you do this similar to what I've done over here, because otherwise your science materials are going to be spread between 2 different planets, and that's typically not efficient, especially since you want all your antimatter to be, well, localized as well. You could of course opt to replace these matrix labs with the upgraded version as well. Haven't actually done that over here, mostly because it's a lot, well, it's not that much work, but I kind of like the looks of these things. But you can use the upgraded version as well, and especially if you're going to be producing the actual 50 plus science per second, you are going to have to upgrade some parts of this, because otherwise it's simply not going to cut it. Or you can of course stack these things up a lot higher as well than I've done in the blueprint over here. So do that in whichever way you want. Now similarly, you could use the remaining space over here to again produce whatever you want. Keep in mind that you do need a lot of power for a planet like this. I mean, I have added in a lot of this deuterium power over here, but it's definitely not going to cut it. So you would need a similar line over here, because remember the upgraded buildings, even though it seems like we don't have a lot of them, well, we actually did copy paste the entire blueprint 10 times. But remember that these things are actually requesting a lot more power than the base variant. So they're a lot faster, but they actually require exponentially more power as well. So you might actually need to resort to putting some artificial stars here, or just put in a whole lot of solar panels. That actually goes a very long way as well. If you're on a planet like I am over here with 136% solar energy ratio, don't underestimate the power of solar panels, even late in the game. Long story short, just make sure you have enough power on this planet as well. This is actually one reason why you could opt to not have the ILSs send out their own vessels, because using warpers actually requires a lot of power, and if you just have all the other places where you're mining that stuff, import that to this planet, or export it in that case, I guess, to this planet, then that's going to consume the power on those planets, but not here. So something to consider if you're finding yourself low on energy on a high production planet like we have over here. And there you go. If you want, you can add in some foundations as well to make it look like a whole flying billiard ball that is actually covered with factories for some reason. Anyway, final notes about this type of build. I don't actually recommend to basically copy paste a huge factory like this from the get-go. Just make a build like this, again, with a smaller set of requirements. So in this case, we're producing 4 science per second in the initial design. Make sure that you actually have all the resources required to get that up and running and keep it up and running. Then place down a second version of that next to it, get more resources, and basically keep progressing until you have your entire planet up and running. The reason for that is that if you don't do that, there's going to be a whole lot of inefficiency of bots flying up and down. Power might be low, you're actually producing a lot of power, but you don't need all of it. Long story short, it's super inefficient to scale up from the get-go compared to scaling up step by step, basically making sure you actually have the resources and power to support all of that. On the plus side, because that is more efficient, you're actually also going to be progressing through your technology tree a lot more efficiently like that. So again, there's a lot of reasons to do that. So this is why when you look at my blueprint collection, you will find only the design for this thing. And all of the other things that I've just showed you are also in the blueprint designs, but are all separate blueprints. Don't make planet-wide blueprints, basically. I mean, you can, it's kind of cool to do so, but again, it's not super efficient to actually start up your factory from the get-go with a huge blueprint. Also, if you do place a planet-wide blueprint and you don't have a top-of-the-line system, your game is going to show very low FPS and very low game pace speed, because the game doesn't really handle super large blueprints very well. So it's actually faster to build it without placing everything down at the same time compared to doing it step by step as well. So lots of reason basically to keep everything a little bit more modular than I've done in this particular, what I'm showing you right here. Let me know in the comments, is there anything else in this masterclass that you feel we haven't really covered yet that I should really cover? Because I feel like this should probably be the last episode, but it's completely up to you guys. If there's some good ideas out there, then I'm more than happy to hear them. And of course, make a couple of more episodes if that's what you guys want. And if there's actually some interesting ideas that actually add something to the masterclass as well. If you're still here, you're awesome. And I do hope to catch you in the next one.